and it's time to go over my March reading stats. I cannot believe it is already April. March flew by. March barely even happened, I would argue. But I did read some books in it. As I go through this, you'll notice that it is very technically my worst reading month so far this year, but it is by no means a bad reading month because January and February were already off the chain. It's okay that this is lower because this is still an insane number of books, I would say. So let's get straight into it. We're going to start with the number of books that I read. It was 25 for a total of 7,609 pages. This meant that my average pages per day was about 245.45, so not approximately, it was more exact. And in the month of March, I spent a total of 94 hours reading. Again, this is lower than the previous 2 months, but that's okay. I have some theories as to why this was the case. They're twofold. One, I've been working my way through a TV show, and I wasn't doing that in the previous months, so that has taken some of my reading time. And then also, you'll notice later when I talk about audiobooks, I didn't read them, So that also takes away some time reading because you can listen to an audiobook in times when you can't use your eyeballs to read a book. But I didn't listen to an audiobook, so it all works out in the end. Still 94 hours for a month, not shabby, which means that I read for about 3 hours every day. I read with my eyeballs for 31 out of 31 of the days, so a solid 100%, and I read with my earballs 0 out of 31 days for a nice solid 0%. Also, my average days to finish a book for all the books that I finished this month was 12.2 days. Now let's get into some fun graphs. We'll start with my genre graph, which looks pretty normal, except I would say one thing that looks very abnormal about this graph from where I'm looking at it on my computer is that I didn't read a single mystery book. And the reason that's weird is because I've read 13 mysteries so far this year. For 0 of them to be this month is a little wacky. It was one of my top read genres last year, so to have a month where I didn't read any is a little strange. I did read 1 thriller, but that's it. Our top category is actually nonfiction? Am I reading this right? Yeah, I read 6 nonfiction books. That's a little wacky. I also read a couple contemporaries, some fantasy, a historical, a poetry book. That was 4 Tales from Two Trails, 5 romance books, so plenty of romance in there, a sci-fi, and then that thriller. So a good mix of things, but no mysteries, and a high number of nonfiction books, which is interesting. Okay, it's interesting. Oh, and also I did read 3 Magic Treehouse books, so that's the adventure portion of the graph. Speaking of nonfiction books, we can look at my fiction versus nonfiction, where nonfiction is almost a quarter of my books. It's 24%, so 6 of my 25 books, which is wacky because for the whole year, 10% of my reads have been nonfiction, and a lot of that is coming from this, honestly, because I've read 10 nonfiction books so far this year, and 6 of them were in March. That's the majority of them, so go off, I've read a lot of nonfiction this month. Don't know what was up with me. Next, we'll talk about book size. I keep proclaiming this is the year of short books, so the shortest book that I read this month was Rosie and the Dreamboat, which was 44 pages in length, but to balance that out, the longest book that I read was Assassin's Quest, which was 838 pages. So if you averaged them out, they were about 400 pages each. Think about it like that. 800 divided by 2 normal-sized books for 2 extreme ends of the spectrum. But my average pages per book was actually 304.36, so a little on the lower end, I would say, probably because I did read several of these improbable meet-cute novellas, as well as several Magic Treehouse books, etc., etc. But to look at the spread of books, I did largely read small books that were actually the majority of my reads with 56% of this graph, then followed by medium books with 32%, so about a third. I did read a couple large books, how many to be exact? 2 of them, and then Assassin's Quest technically counted as chunky because it's over 700 pages. Go me. And I can honestly tell you that the reason that I probably read 25 books instead of more is because I did read Assassin's Quest, and that was about a week worth of my reading time, pretty much, because that was a week I went to a conference, so I didn't have much reading time anyway, well, except on the plane, I guess. The point is, it took up a lot of reading time, but I'm really proud of it. Next, we'll move on to star ratings. We have a pretty typical spread for me with this, with a lot of 4 stars, a hefty chunk of 3.5 stars, a good selection of 3 stars. We also had a couple 5 stars. Let's see, 3 of them. 3 5 stars, which I think is pretty excellent for a month, considering that in January I had not a single 5-star read. I also had a couple 4.5 stars, and again, that 4-star category is really pulling right here. I didn't rate anything lower than a 2.5 stars, and I think I only rated one book 2.5 stars. Yep, that seems to be right. So 24 of my 25 reads were 3 stars and above for the month, which I think is not that shabby. This also meant that my average rating was 3.9, which is, again, pretty high, because I feel like my average rating for all of last year was 3.5, so this is 0.4 above that. For series versus standalone, it was almost exactly half and half, with 48% of them being books that were part of a series and 52% of them being standalones. I primarily read new to me authors, with 64% of them, and this is a drastic change from the first 2 months of the year, because in the first 2 months of the year I read so many books from series that I was primarily reading authors that I had read from before. So I kicked it up with the new to me authors, which I think is a more normal spread for me, to have more new to me authors than authors I've read from before. You can tell that that's a change because I've read 30 books by new to me authors so far this year, and 16 in the month of March. That's a little more than half. Whereas I've read 69 books from authors that I've read from before so far this year, and 9 of them were from this month. For type of publishing, per usual, they were largely traditionally published works, at least one indie book, and no self-published that I could find. This is pretty normal to me, as sad as that is to say sometimes, where I largely have traditionally published books and then a small smattering of indie and self-published books. For publication date, they were largely backlist books, which is pretty normal to me, except the weird thing here is that I did have a significant chunk of books from 2024. My libraries have been coming in clutch. I've been going a little insane checking out titles as soon as they're added, so 24% of my reads were published this year. Like the Improbable Meet Cute stories are all from this year. I had some YAs that came out in March that I read, and none of the 2024 releases that I read were advanced reader copies. They were all just books that I read from my library that came out this year. So the smallest portion is 2023 books. I just think it's weird how many 2024 releases there are in this pie for me. That's not normal for me, but I like it. You can tell that it's a lot of 2024 books in comparison to what I usually read, because I read 6 of them this month, but I've read 8 so far this year. That means I've only read 2 books across the 2 other months that came out in 2024, but I read 6 in March. For age range, the majority of them were adult books, 60% of them, with a large portion of children's books. Why do I suddenly feel like I'm on the Weather Channel? We have a nice front coming in from the west, and then a smaller portion, but still there, portion of young adult books. Interestingly enough, coming back to the earball comment, here's my format chart. You can see I did not read a single audiobook. They were only ebooks or physical books. Ebooks dominated, with 72% of my graph being ebooks. I did read 7 physical books though, which is pretty good for me in a month. And where did I acquire these books? Per usual, largely from my library, with 60% of them coming from Libby. 12% of them were also borrowed. These were the Improbable Meet Cute stories. They came from Amazon Prime. And then 28% of them were books that I owned. Every single physical book that I read in the month of March was a book that I owned. So nice. That's enough graphs. Let's talk about some goals. We'll start by talking about money. In the month of March, I did acquire the most books that I've acquired in a month so far this year. I acquired 6 books for a total of $18.75. So you can tell they were either Dollar Tree books or used bookstore books. Still not that bad. For 6 books under 20 bucks, a steal. That said, so that I don't spend all my money on books, I use my library often, and so this month I saved $245, and let's check it, 57 cents using the library, which brings my total for the year over $1,000 to $1,109.08 of savings by using the library. Thank you, library. Switching over to more common goals, my Goodreads goal was 52 books. I have now read 98, which puts me at 188% of my goal, which I think is so fun to say, and that's why I will never move my Goodreads goal up, even when I pass it. I set out to read 24 owned books this year. I've read 13 so far, which puts me at 54% of that goal. I also set out to read 24 owned ebooks this year. I'm at 6, which is the exact same as last month. I didn't read a single owned ebook in the month of March. Oops. And then finally, I'm trying to read on my iPad more to justify buying a Kindle this summer. So 8 of my reads this month were read on my iPad. That was 8 out of my 18 ebooks, so 44.4% of my ebook reading for the month was done on the iPad, and 8 out of my 25 books total, so it was 32% of my books for the whole month. This means that I read 10 ebooks on my phone, so 2 more, but not bad, I'll take it. So those were all my bookish stats for the month of March. If you got this far in the video, give me a little like graph emoji. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!